Hi there, my name is David Rowan. I'm a teacher of astrology. I've been teaching astrology and its related topics for 23 years. And one of the things we look at on my introduction course is if astrology is able to illuminate and illustrate, articulate not just potentials that we might have coming up in our future trends, but also for deep insight into our character, our makeup, the dynamics of our unconscious, and the potentials of that which we may be. If this ancient art is able to illuminate these things to a magnitude of accuracy which is profound, then how come it isn't kind of more widely known, shouted from the rooftops or even talked about on the BBC? And there's actually a reason for this. One of my ex-students asked the question about this earlier, and I thought I'd make a little video about it, just so that you maybe have a bit of insight into more than just sun sign astrology. Well, I was lucky enough to be one of the first students of a Master of Arts degree at Bath Spa University in Cultural Astronomy and Astrology in 2002. And it was, for us, a moment of history as a collective group, in that we were the first people to be studying the topic of astrology on British university soil for 400 years. And in one of the lectures, we discussed this very topic, the fact that, what happened to astrology before? Well, astrology used to be ubiquitous. It was everywhere. In fact, even today, Easter Day, is a very pertinent moment, I guess, to discuss what happened. Now, as you know, the date of Easter moves around. Christmas is a regular date in the fixed calendar, but Easter shuffles about, and the reason for that it's Easter Sunday is the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox. And of course, lunation cycles don't necessarily coincide with the solar calendar. They're two separate rhythmic cycles, and so the date of Easter slews around with a 4-week variance. And astrology comes from Babylon. It's Mesopotamian in its origin, or at least horoscopic astrology is Mesopotamian in its origin. I would say that every culture has its astrologos, its relationship with the heavens, its knowledge of the heavens. You can't build pyramids and Stonehenge without having some kind of relationship with the sky. But still, horoscopic astrology has its roots in Mesopotamia, and therefore is a pagan thing. The Greeks picked it up, and when they invaded, and they added to it this zodiac, a circle of animals, and they had a pantheon of gods and goddesses. So again, a pagan thing. And the Christian Church had to allow this pagan art to exist because the only people who could calculate the date of Easter were the astrologers. This was before there was a division between astronomy and astrology, when they were both one and the same craft. St. Thomas Aquinas found a way of being able to justify keeping astrology without persecuting the astrologers by saying that there were two kind of types of astrology. The type of astrology that can be used for weather forecasting or for planting seeds by farmers, he called natural astrology. And the kind of astrology where you might make some kind of judgment of character, he's called judicial astrology. And he said that only God has sovereignty or the ability to cast judgment on character, and therefore astrology cannot be used for that, but you can use it for this other stuff. And in that way they allowed astrologers to exist without persecuting them, and therefore meaning they can't calculate Easter anymore. So through the 15th and 16th century, as this kind of new rising idea of scientia and enlightenment began to kind of take hold after kind of Galileo and Bacon and Descartes and so forth, by the time you get into the 16th century, there's the newly formed Royal Society, and they both wanted to get these astrologers out of the way. There were resident astrologers in Parliament. In fact, if you go to Houses of Parliament today, you'll find that there are runners, guys in long coats and tails, running around with messages, and they have a piece of the crown jewels around their neck. It's solid silver, and it's a figure that has there's a circle with a cross underneath, and this guy has little kind of a crescent horns on top of his head, and it's the astrological symbol for Mercury. And I asked one guy, "Excuse me, what's that?" He proudly said, "It's a part of the crown jewels. This is Mercury," using the Roman god name, which kind of suggests that it comes from astrology rather than using a Greek name, Hermes, which would be more indicative of scholarly kind of studying the classics from Oxford. So the fact that it has a Roman name kind of reveals that there was an astrological basis behind this. And it was the Civil War that finally gave them the opportunity to get rid of astrology from mainstream society. You know, they asked the astrologers who will win, Parliament or the King, and the astrologers who sided with Parliament were seen to be victorious, but those who sided with the King when they cut the King's head off were discredited. Then later on, when they restored the monarchy, obviously the astrologers who sided with Parliament were now discredited, which didn't leave much. And around 1671, astrology was kicked out of British University. It floundered and went into a backwater. In fact, one writer described astrology as something which was only suitable for farmers, women, and the vulgar. And so, all through the rest of the 1600s and the 17th, the 18th century, astrology was kind of a very kind of hardly known. And during the beginning of the 19th century, after the Napoleonic Wars, there were a lot of young men, severely wounded young men, begging on streets of cities. They didn't have antibiotics, obviously, or disinfectant, and so their wounds were terrible wounds created in these wars. And in cities in Europe, they were kind of tolerated, but in Britain, they weren't. So they created the Vagrancy Act of 1824 to clear the streets of these beggars. And this was for the punishment of idle and disorderly persons and rogues and vagabonds. And Section 4 of the Vagrancy Act included astrology. You see, these young men would use any device possible to be able to kind of get some money, really. They would pester people by reading palms, doing sleight of hand, magician tricks. They would sing songs, they would do all kinds of things. And so the authorities lumped all this stuff together so that they could then have a reason for getting rid of them. And it said every person pretending or professing to tell fortunes or using any subtle craft, means or device by palmistry or otherwise, to deceive or impose on any of His Majesty's subjects. So astrologers were in danger of arrest from mid-19th to early 20th century. The Edwardians were slightly more relaxed. There were a couple of astrologers who were arrested. The police would use honey traps. So they would book up an astrological reading, and the astrologer, having done his work, would then ask for payment, and at that moment then the handcuffs would go on. And a famous theosophist and astrologer called Alan Leo was taken to court twice, and the second time he was found guilty and found £5. So, yes, so it was a dangerous time to be an astrologer. Section 4 of the Vagrants and Vagabonds Act was repealed in 1989, and it wasn't replaced. Luckily, through the 20th century, I guess because of the proliferation of sun sign columns in newspapers, astrologers weren't being arrested at every turn, but we could potentially have been, acting in a criminal way until 1989. In fact, astrologers didn't even realise that the law had been repealed. And as late as the 7th of June in 1991, as Dr. Patrick Curry writes in the book Confusion of Prophets, in words that ring down the centuries, the Daily Express snarled that astrologers and the rest of the fortune-telling caboodle are free to frighten us into staying home with our heads under the covers. The Home Secretary must act now to muzzle these pests, confine them to their kennels. And this appeared a few pages away from the Daily Sunshine column. So I don't know what was happening, in the tea room when that appeared in the paper. Now, during the 1950s, as television became obviously a popular medium, and then the independent in Britain, the independent channel of ITV came into being, they had to create a document that would oversee the rules and regulations of what can be broadcast, what can't be broadcast, and so forth. The ITC, the Independent Television Commission, created a policy document. And in the policy document, it adopted the Vagrants and Vagabonds Act. So, on television, it said that any of those things, palmistry, astrology, fortune-telling, mediumship, spiritualism, etc., could only be discussed as circus entertainment, or it can be ridiculed. And that was in their policy. Now, the ITC have been superseded by Ofcom, and Ofcom have adopted this policy. So astrology can only be shown on terrestrial British television as a folly, as a foolishness, and it cannot be discussed as a serious topic. So there isn't a BBC documentary talking about astrology in a serious way. Channel 4 gets Richard Dawkins to do a program called The Enemies of Reason, and he goes to psychic fairs and he talks to people who aren't academically educated. And it looks like, you know, a giant kind of throwing stones at a child academically. And we kind of thought at the time, why isn't he talking to Nicholas Campion? Why isn't he talking to Patrick Curry? Other people who are doctors, academic doctors in the topic, so that then they could have an equal match of intellect, and that would be an interesting thing to observe. And the answer is, of course, because it cannot be shown as a serious subject unless you have a specific license. So there are satellite channels that talk about astrology, but of course on the satellite channels they're not necessarily inclined to talk about astrology in a kind of an academically serious way. So this means then that the general public don't get to hear of astrology as a serious topic, as something worthy of merit, as something that has considered thought and depth to it. It's only ever seen and it's only ever portrayed as some kind of circus entertainment or folly from history. But there's something about it that remains very, very popular indeed. It seems to survive through centuries, no matter how many stones are thrown at it, much to the annoyance of people who don't fully understand the depth of this ancient art. Now, so that's given you a bit of an insight into, there could be more depth to this topic than you might have thought. You're welcome to come along and find out even more. I'll put a link to my online astrology training course in the comments and things with this YouTube clip. But I'll have to leave it there because on YouTube, as you may know, you can only have about 15 minutes or so to be able to discuss things, and we're now at 13 minutes in. So I'll leave it there, but my website is www.davidrowan.co.uk, and I'll put a URL to the training course there. And I hope that's given you a bit of an insight into how come I talk about this ancient art a lot, and yet the BBC and popular broadcasters never look at it at all. Thanks for listening. Cheers. Bye.